When you open up a map application on your phone, there's this expectation of total, absolute reality.
Right, like you're seeing the world exactly as it is.
Exactly. You see the little blue dot that represents you. You see the gray blocks that are buildings, the yellow lines for streets. I mean, it feels definitive. It tells you exactly what is there.
It definitely feels like a complete objective snapshot of the world. It's, comforting in its certainty.
But then you start peeling back the pavement, metaphorically speaking, and you realize that map is lying to you.
Oh, absolutely.
Or at least it's hiding about 99% of the truth. So today, we're taking you to a single neighborhood in Tokyo where, over the last 1,000 years, governments have desperately tried to, erase the local identity.
They tried to rewrite the religion, delete the town's name from existence.
And they failed almost every single time.
Yeah, it's a fascinating look at how a landscape actually remembers what people try to force it to forget.
Exactly. So if you are listening to this right now, if you've ever walked down a quiet city street anywhere in the world and just wondered, what used to be right here, this deep dive is going to give you a completely new way to read the urban landscape.
We've got our hands on an incredible source today. It's this spiritual, geographical, historical archive focused on Tokyo's Meguro ward.
Specifically, a former village area called Hibusuma. We are going to uncover 5 historical stories layered in this dirt, and we'll even map out 5 hidden gems for your next visit to Tokyo.
And we are looking at 1,150 years of history here. So to understand this place, you really have to start with the most basic element of geography, which is the name.
Right. Or rather, the name that got deleted.
Exactly.
Okay, let's unpack this. Our first stop on this invisible map is an ancient boundary. We're looking at a place historically called Fusuma.
Yeah, and the name itself is a total mystery.
Because if you look at the literal kanji characters used to write Fusuma today, it translates to blanket or bedding. But our archive shows there was never any blanket manufacturing or trade here whatsoever.
No, not at all. The local historical records actually list 5 competing theories for where this name came from.
Like what?
Well, it might have been a place that grew horse feed, or maybe a marsh where horses frequently got stuck. Some people even thought the local hills were just shaped like a lumpy bed.
I mean, a lumpy bed, that is quite a stretch.
Right. But the most compelling theory, the one that really sets the stage for everything we're going to talk about today, has absolutely nothing to do with horses or blankets.
Yeah, what's fascinating here is the theory that Fusuma is actually a linguistic corruption of an ancient name, specifically Fusegi Masuokami.
Which was an ancient Shinto boundary guardian deity.
Right. So how exactly does a boundary deity work? Is it like a spiritual bouncer?
That's a really great way to put it. In early Japanese village structures, they believed that evil, disease, and disaster literally walked down the roads from the outside world.
Wow. Okay.
So these guardian deities were placed at the very edge of the agricultural community, usually at crossroads or bridges.
Just to keep watch.
Exactly. Their entire job was to stand at the border and repel that negative energy, basically keeping the village safe.
It's like a spiritual firewall.
Yeah.
And if this theory is true, this place name is essentially a linguistic fossil.
A memory encoded into syllables, yeah.
An ancient memory that managed to survive for centuries, up until the Meiji government came along in the late 19th century.
Right. And to understand why the Meiji government cared about a small village name, you have to look at what was happening in 1889.
Japan was scrambling to modernize, right?
Desperately. They were terrified of being colonized by Western powers, so they needed to build a strong, centralized, modern state immediately. And that meant streamlining taxes and administration.
So they didn't have time for, thousands of tiny, organically named villages.
Exactly. So they forced the village of Fusuma to merge with its neighbor, Himonya, to create a larger, more efficient administrative district.
And in a classic act of bureaucratic compromise, they just mashed the names together.
Yeah, they took one character from each and created an entirely artificial name, Hibusuma.
A name nobody actually asked for and nobody felt connected to. It was just a spreadsheet decision.
Completely top-down.
And then it gets worse. By 1964, Tokyo is gearing up for the Olympics, totally modernizing its ward systems, and even the artificial name Hibusumi was wiped from the official mailing addresses.
So the ancient name Fusuma was just systematically erased from the map.
It is a textbook example of top-down administrative erasure overriding organic grassroots geographical memory. The state just decided the past was inconvenient.
But then this brings us to our first hidden gem for you to visit. The erasure wasn't 100% successful.
Right. If you are in Tokyo today, you can navigate your way to Fusumacho Park. It's just this tiny, unremarkable little neighborhood park.
There are no grand statues, no historical plaques explaining any of this.
Yeah, it's just a patch of sand, some playground equipment, maybe a bench. The ambient noise of the modern city just sort of surrounds it.
But if you go stand in that tiny park, you are standing on the very last physical, geographical remnant of an ancient guardian deity's name.
You are standing in the linguistic footprint of Fusegi Masaokami. It's the one place the spreadsheet couldn't quite reach.
It really highlights how local memory finds a way to resist being entirely overhidden, even if it's just clinging to the name of a pocket park.
And that idea of resistance, that the refusal to be overwritten, it isn't just about ancient names. It's actually baked into the very soil of this area.
Definitely.
Because just down the road, that same defiant energy took the form of a medieval Buddhist fortress.
Which brings us to our second story, a temple originally called Hohke-ji, which is now known as ENG.
Yeah, the history of this temple involves a fascinating and, frankly, highly radical sect of Nichiren Buddhism known as the Fuju Fuse.
The name translates roughly to receive not, give not.
This sect was established around 1283. And their core philosophy was intense. They believed that they could not take donations or alms from non-believers. And they wouldn't give anything to non-believers either.
They viewed any interaction with the unfaithful as a literal pollution of the cosmic order.
It was such an uncompromising stance.
To them, the physical world was the domain of their sacred text, the Lotus Sutra. Any compromise, any mixing with other doctrines was a betrayal of the universe itself.
But here's where I have to push back a bit. I understand being strict about your religion, but why would the Io shogunate the military government ruling Japan at the time? Why would they care if a random temple in a farming village refused to take people's money?
It does seem counterintuitive, doesn't it?
Yeah, that doesn't sound like a crime. If anything, it sounds like bad business for the monks.
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, it becomes incredibly clear why the shogun was terrified of them. The shogunate controlled the population through something called the Taraki system.
Okay, what was that? Like a census?
It was a census, a tax registry, and an ideological purity test all rolled into one.
Oh, why?
Essentially, every single citizen had to register with a local Buddhist temple and pay them mandatory donations. The temple would then issue a certificate proving you were a good Buddhist.
Which proved you weren't secretly a Christian or a political rebel.
Exactly. You couldn't travel, you couldn't marry, you couldn't get a job without this certificate.
That is wild. So the temples were essentially franchised government field offices.
Precisely. And the shogunate mandated that these temples had to accept donations from everyone, regardless of the donor's personal internal beliefs, just keep the system running.
Oh, I see.
So, by refusing to accept the shogun's mandatory donations, the Fuju Fuse sect was throwing a wrench into the entire machinery of state control.
They were basically declaring the government spiritually illegitimate.
Yeah, they were saying, your money is dirty, your system is corrupt, and your political authority means absolutely nothing to our cosmos.
They turned this rural area into a spiritual quarantine zone. It wasn't a theological debate at all. It was a total rejection of the government's right to rule them.
And the shogunate did not take that lightly.
No, they didn't. But since they couldn't just say, we're mad they won't do our paperwork, they launched an incredible smear campaign against the temple.
The propaganda was quite vicious. And you have to remember, this is the 17th century. They don't have mass media.
Right.
They have notice boards, public proclamations, and rumor mills.
And they used those rumor mills to invent a 17th century moral panic. They spread this legend called the Lotus Rebirth.
Such a dark story.
Right. The government claimed that the priests at this temple were luring wealthy, devout believers into sitting on this giant copper lotus stand.
Under the guise of a spiritual ritual.
Yeah. The priests would promise that if you sat there while they chanted, you would peacefully transition to paradise. But secretly, the priests were underneath the platform, stabbing the believers to death with long spikes so they could steal their wealth.
Spikes from underneath. It's a remarkably gruesome image, designed specifically to turn the local populace against the monks.
It's terrifying.
And according to the government's legend, this murdering was only stopped when a famous folk hero, Isshin Tsuke, hid a copper mirror under the platform to block the spikes and expose the evil priests to the authorities.
It's an elaborate horror story. But our sources make it completely clear This was almost certainly a fabricated narrative planted by the government to justify crushing the sect.
It gave them the excuse they needed to raid the temple and force it to convert to a different, compliant Buddhist sect in 1698.
It is a brilliant, dark example of political propaganda being used to manufacture consent for the destruction of a rebellious group.
Absolutely.
But again, the resistance leaves a mark. For your tourist itinerary, our second hidden gem is ENG Temple today. It is incredible.
Highly recommended. It houses the Shaka Hall, which is actually the oldest wooden building in all of Tokyo's wards.
Wow, really?
Yeah, it dates back to the Muromachi period, which is the 1400s. That's long before Japan was even a unified country under the shogun.
And while you're there, look for the 5-story stone pagoda. It's covered in beautiful green moss, and it was built for a Fuju Fuse priest named Nichiken.
It is a literal physical monument to their unyielding universe. The 5 tiers represent earth, water, fire, wind, and void.
Oh, and you can't miss the black Neo-Guardian statues hidden in the shadows of the main gate. It's wild to stand in this peaceful courtyard and think about the sheer political danger that building used to represent.
It really is. Now, that unyielding devotion we saw at the temple wasn't an anomaly for this neighborhood, because just down the road, that same intensity of belief took a much darker, almost paradoxical turn.
Yeah, this brings us to our third story, and it involves a sacred tree that was literally loved to death.
We're looking at Yakumo Hikawa Shrine.
Back in the Edo period, before modern medicine, this shrine became incredibly famous for something called shaku fusegi, which was a divine cure for severe stomach cramps.
Shrines often had specific specialties, ailments they were known to cure, which would draw desperate pilgrims from all over the country.
Right. And here's where it gets really interesting. The believers didn't just pray at the shrine. There was a giant red oak tree on the grounds, and word spread that if you peeled the bark off this specific tree, boiled it down, and drank the tea, your stomach cramps would go away.
You can imagine the desperation. Chronic abdominal pain, no painkillers, no doctors. People flocked to this tree hoping for a miracle.
They flocked to it and they peeled the bark. And they kept peeling. Hundreds, maybe thousands of people over the years stripping this tree bare.
Which is fatal for a tree.
Right. Biologically speaking, if you strip the bark all the way around a tree's trunk, a process called girdling, you sever the phloem. That's the vascular tissue that carries the nutrients from the leaves down to the roots.
So the tree effectively starves to death.
Exactly. They peeled it so much that they literally killed the sacred tree.
This raises an important question, really a profound paradox, about the nature of folk religion. In Shinto, a sacred tree like this is called a yorishiro.
Right, a vessel.
It is not just a symbol of the god, it is the actual physical vessel that the divine spirit inhabits when it visits the human realm.
So they are coming to this god for healing.
And their overwhelming devotion, their desperate need for that healing, drives them to physically destroy the very vessel they are praying to.
That is just tragic.
It is an act of destruction born entirely out of reverence. It's a tragedy where the god is essentially killed by the faith of its followers.
The psychological weight of that on the community must have been immense. You can't just kill a god and feel fine about it.
Definitely not.
In fact, the archives mention a Meiji-era ghost story that popped up later in the neighborhood called the Groaning Oak. People claimed that between midnight and 3 a.m. they could hear the dead tree groaning from the shrine's forest.
It is what we might call a sonic trauma landscape.
A sonic trauma landscape.
Yeah. The community knew they had destroyed a sacred object. That irreversible act created a collective lingering guilt, which manifested as an auditory hallucination.
The sound of the dying cosmic order, crying out in the dark, reminding them of what they did to survive. It gives me chills just thinking about it.
It's very haunting.
And listener, you can actually go see this. This is your third hidden gem. The dead stump of that exact red oak is still sitting next to the shrine today.
There are no signs pointing it out. It hasn't been removed or replaced with a plaque.
You just have to know it's there. You can walk right up to it and touch the gray, cracked wood. It's this incredibly rare artifact of a paradox.
And while you're in the neighborhood, it's also worth noting that the area itself is called Yakumo,
which actually comes from the very first word of Japan's oldest known waka poem, written by the mythic god Susanoo. So you have the oldest poem in Japan, anchoring a neighborhood where a tree was loved to death.
It is a landscape layered with deep, often contradictory human emotions. And that history of resistance, whether it's fighting the government or fighting illness, leads us right into our fourth story.
Yeah, we've seen defiance from local Shinto boundaries. We've seen it from uncompromising Buddhist monks. But this final story of resistance comes from a foreigner who smuggled himself into a locked country.
This one plays out like an espionage thriller.
It really does. The year is 1708. Japan has been strictly locked down under the Sakoku policy for decades. No foreigners in, no Japanese out.
Christianity is entirely outlawed and violently suppressed.
And then an Italian Catholic priest named Giovanni Battista Sidotti secretly lands on a southern Japanese island.
To give this some context, Sidotti arrived 159 years after Francis Xavier first brought Christianity to Japan.
So the religion had already been crushed.
Completely. He was the very last Western missionary to attempt to infiltrate Japan during the Edo period.
And how he got in is wild. He convinced the ship to drop him off at night, and he disguised himself as a Japanese samurai, complete with a top knot and a kimono.
But he was Italian.
Right. He didn't speak the language well, and he obviously looked foreign. So he didn't make it far. He was captured almost immediately and sent to Edo, modern-day Tokyo, where he was imprisoned in a place called the Kirishitan Yashiki.
The Christian Mansion. This was a special, high-security prison designed specifically for holding and interrogating foreign priests and local converts.
And he was interrogated by one of the most brilliant minds of the era, Arai Hakuseki, who was a top scholar and political advisor to the shogun.
What's fascinating here is the dynamic between the two men. Hakuseki was fully prepared to despise this illegal missionary.
Naturally.
But instead, he was deeply impressed by Sidotti's intellect, his knowledge of global geography, and his unwavering character. Hakuseki actually wrote that Sidotti was a man of profound virtue.
He even formally recommended that the shogunate treat him humanely, or better yet, deport him instead of executing him.
But the shogunate wasn't taking any chances with an ideology they viewed as a threat to their absolute control.
Right. So Sidotti was sentenced to life in prison. And here is where his story perfectly mirrors those rebellious Buddhist monks we talked about earlier.
The Fuju Fuse sect.
Exactly. Sidotti is locked away, completely isolated, a lone man against the entire state apparatus. But he refuses to yield an inch of his faith. He actually secretly baptized the Japanese caretakers who were assigned to watch him in the prison.
It was an incredible act of defiance, and when the shogunate found out he was still actively proselytizing, they threw him into an underground cell where he eventually died of starvation and exposure.
Wow.
But if we connect this to the bigger picture, Sidotti and the Fuju Fuse Buddhist sect were fighting the exact same fight in the exact same geographical area.
They were both isolated, decades-long stands against the absolute authority of the state, demanding the right to their own spiritual truth.
And just like the Buddhists, Sidotti left a physical mark on this neighborhood that you can visit today.
Yes. Our fourth hidden gem is the Catholic Himonya Church, also known as the Salesian Church. It was built in 1954 right here in Meguro Ward.
And the connection here is truly serendipitous. It sounds like something out of a novel.
It really does. As they were finishing the construction of this church, researchers over at the Tokyo National Museum were digging through a dusty box of old, confiscated Christian artifacts.
Things that had been hidden away for centuries.
Yeah, and they found a rolled-up copper plate painting of the Virgin Mary. It turns out this was the exact painting that Giovanni Battista Sidotti had brought with him when he sneaked onto that beach in 1708.
It had been locked away in dark government vaults for almost 250 years, a hidden piece of contraband.
And they found it right as this church in his old neighborhood was opening.
Yeah.
So they named the church's patron the Santa Maria of Edo.
That is just incredible timing.
Today, you can visit this church. You walk off a totally normal, modern Tokyo residential street, and suddenly you are standing in a magnificent Romanesque basilica looking up at Italian Renaissance frescoes.
You are standing in the echo of a Sicilian priest's final prayer.
It is a stunning geographical anomaly, a piece of the Mediterranean dropped into a Tokyo suburb, anchored by a 300-year-old act of defiance.
It really makes you reconsider the landscape.
So what does this all mean? When you look at this whole map we've laid out, an erased boundary god, a smeared Buddhist sect, a murdered tree, and a smuggled Italian painting, it feels like this one patch of dirt is just structurally rejecting every attempt to rewrite its history.
That is a perfect analogy.
It reminds me of trying to paint over a bright red wall with cheap white paint. No matter how many coats the government applies, the red eventually bleeds right back through.
Right, and the archive we're using actually has a brilliant academic term for exactly what you're describing. They call this area a faith sediment basin.
A sediment basin. Like geology, where layers of rock build up over millions of years.
Exactly. Over the course of 1,150 years, this tiny, specific geographic area was subjected to massive, forced identity shifts.
Just constant change.
First, it was organic, grassroots Shinto. Then it was forced to be Tendai Buddhist by early rulers. Then the locals radically shifted to Nichiren Buddhism.
Then the Edo government violently forced it back to Tendai.
Then the Meiji government tried to administratively erase its name from the maps entirely. And finally, modern Catholicism layered itself on top in the 20th century.
It's layer upon layer of authorities trying to force a new reality.
But here's the crucial insight. None of those rewrites were ever completely successful. No single ideology ever achieved a total victory here. Every single past layer managed to survive the pressure.
The Shinto god survived in the name of a playground.
The Nichiren rebellion survived in a mossy stone pagoda.
The Catholic resistance survived in a copperplate painting. It absorbs the trauma, it absorbs the new rules, but it keeps the receipts.
It is a monument to the absolute resilience of human geography. It proves that a government can change the laws, they can tear down the old buildings, and they can even legally change the names on the map. But the spiritual sediment, the collective memory of the people who actually walked that ground, always remains.
That is just incredible. Listener, we've only scratched the surface of what's in these archives today. If you are the kind of person who loves to keep digging, and we know you are, you can actually look up some of the primary sources we pulled from today to explore more on your own.
Highly recommend checking them out.
You can search for Arai Hakuseki's original interrogation notes of Sidotti, which are published under the title Seokibun. Or you can dig into the National Diet Library's digital archives and look for the 1932 Hibusuma Town Chronicle. The history is out there, waiting for you to find it.
I want to leave you with one final image from these sources, something we haven't touched on yet, but that beautifully captures everything we've discussed today.
But what is it?
Through all this history, the monks, the shrines, the priests, there was a river flowing through this area called the Nomikawa. The archives note that as recently as the Showa era, which was the early to mid-20th century, this river was a crystal-clear stream.
Okay.
And on warm summer nights, it was absolutely filled with glowworms.
Glowworms, like fireflies lighting up the water.
Yes. And in traditional Japanese culture, fireflies are often seen as the physical manifestation of the souls of the dead. Imagine thousands of glowing souls tracing the path of the water through this historic village.
That sounds beautiful.
But after World War II, during the massive, rapid urbanization of Tokyo, the city needed space. So the Nomikawa River was buried. It was encased in a concrete culvert and paved over to make a greenway for pedestrians.
Oh, wow.
The river was entombed and the glowworms vanished entirely.
So the next time you find yourself walking down a quiet, warm, paved pathway in Tokyo, enjoying the efficiency of the modern city, ask yourself, what ancient names, what ruined gods, and what subterranean rivers are flowing silently right beneath your feet?